All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Again, this is being recorded so people can refer to this in the future. Thanks for joining. I know MEP people probably aren't going to deal with this very much, but I think it's important for you guys to see the exporting of the DWG files just in case you've never done it. And also maybe learn a little something about what Civil is actually looking for and how they coordinate with you all on inverts and the utilities coming to the building and all those things. So thanks for joining. Like I said earlier, I'll try to make this quick so you guys can get back to your daily grind. What you're looking at here is, and by no means to the teams for Cove Day, I'm not picking on you. It's just these were three excellent examples of different footprints and where those might land. So that's why I chose to grab them to show them here. So um, I think what I'll start with is I had a conversation with Justin Crane from WBK probably a year and a half ago, and we were discussing ways to help each other out a little bit more beneficially than we have in the past in terms of, what can we do to improve our process to make it easier for them with exported uh, DWG files for footprints of buildings, and what can they potentially do for us, all of us, architectural and MEP, with interactions with their files. They'll usually send us a DWG Civil 3D file, and we have to bring that in, and usually there's a ton of layering, and it's a million miles away from 0, and we've got a lot of work to try to figure out on how to fix that part of it. But the very first thing that came up a couple weeks ago um, from Ryan Harth and Justin was they had asked for a footprint, and they did get them, which was great. However, the way that it was exported wasn't 100% readable by them, and to no offense to those that produce those DWGs, there really wasn't a set assigned way to know where to go to do this. So a lot of times people when they export out a footprint for Revit files for civil, is they'll just go to a floor plan similar to something like this, and maybe even just go to the view itself, one of the two. And what they'll do is they'll come up and they'll go through the process, file, export, CAD formats, DWG. Like, okay, cool. Yeah, AIA format's probably fine. Oh, there's a WBK export. Let's use that. Awesome. And then they'll click it and it'll go through the process. It's usually pretty quick. It popped up on my other screen here. And I'm just going to save this to the desktop just so I can open it up real quick and show you uh, what some of the issues are, just so you're aware. So I do have CAD open here. I'm going to go ahead and open up that export. And usually we would, and I've done this in the past too, I would just take it and send it along. Well, anybody that's dealt with DWG files in Revit or in general knows that, like I was saying earlier, when you get a Civil 3D DWG file and you're trying to identify layers of what things you want to see and which things you don't, it's a very big hassle because they've got every single layer that they would ever need in the same DWG file, and then those are turned on and off per viewport. What we really want to do is try to make this a little bit easier for them so they don't have to sift through, and we're hoping that they can do the same thing for us by specifically saying, hey, can you give us A, B, or C, and we don't want the rest of it. That's what we're going to try to do here. So let me open up this DWG file here that we created, and I'll show you what this looks like. Now, educated guessing, I could probably figure out where the footprint of this building is. Anybody want to take a shot at telling me where they think the footprint line is in this CAD file?
Is it the yellow?
The outside edge is
Yes.
the stud. Or outside edge of the sheet, it's done.
Oh,
Yeah,
the little gray
Marcus.
line.
No, no, not necessarily. Marcus actually is cheating because he this is one of his projects, and he did a very good job explaining to Ryan where that might be. And what I want to point out here, and saying that kind of a little side structure, what the big thing that I want you to get out of this is that footprints are not always just static. So depending on the construction type of the wall, the construction type of the building, will determine where the footprint actually is. For example, in this particular project, this is a metal stud and gyp wall building. Um, and so usually it's the slab edge is usually where the stud lines up with the slab edge. And usually the best way to look at a footprint is basically the lowest level area that touches the ground. That's basically what a footprint is. It doesn't count anything hanging over like finish. It doesn't include, any kind of canopies or anything like that, although they do want those, and we'll touch on that here in a minute, where those locations are. But if you think of it this way, usually you can get away with thinking, well, I just need the structural foundation footing, or not the footing, the foundation, because that's ultimately the outside edge of your building. That's what it's always going to be. It's whatever's subterranean. That isn't always the case, but for the majority of the times you can get away with that. Now here, if you're looking at this DWG file, and let's just say, nothing against your civil engineer friends, let's just say that they don't know how buildings go together. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But they don't know that this is what these line works mean. They don't know that this is a insulation. So what they're going to do is they're going to typically go in here and they're going to try to go and look at all the layers. Oh, that's S grid. So that's a structural grid. What's this layer? This layer is a wall. Well, that's probably a good start. Let me go see if I can get to this one down here, because there's two of them on top of each other. And get out of there. Oh yeah, that's a wall. You would think, maybe that's it. Well, no, because this one's a wall, right? So, oops, hitting extra keys. This is eye wall, pH, partial height. So one would think, okay, well, how do I know what the actual footprint is? Because there's a lot going on here, right? So I think the point that I want to show here is that it isn't always just point and click and go. Send it on its way and let them deal with it, kind of a thing. So what we've tried to do, excuse me, in Revit is we do have in our standard template, we do have views already set up for exporting for civil. And you'll see that there's two of them here. And again, I'll come back to this one here in a minute. But when Justin and I went through this process a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about things that, what can we possibly do in the Revit file setting wise, view template wise, to make it easy to export out something that would be usable and easy to read. And what we came up with, there was no way to possibly export out one DWG file that has both the footprint and all the canopies and downspouts and the door exits and all those things. It was impossible because of view ranges. So what we determined was we'll have one separate export for civil for the footprint, which will basically be a structural, if you have structural, or your foundation walls if they were drawn by architectural, because they could be drawn by either one depending on where you are at in the project. A lot of times architects will go in and put foundation walls in, or they won't even use foundation walls at this point. They'll wait for structural and they'll just use their regular wall types for the exterior. What we want to try to do is we want to try to make these layers a little bit cleaner. So what you'll notice when I go to this civil footprint is you'll see there's a view template that's already assigned to it, export civil footprint, and you'll see that there's a lot less going on here. What you'll see is, for one, there is a structural Revit model, which is great. So ultimately, you hope and assume that this is accurate, right? And if we look at this thing in 3 dimensions, and if I just turn off, actually, let's just isolate the structural model just for a minute here, along with maybe a couple of these walls. And maybe this will help show what I'm trying to show. So this guy here is just the structural stuff coming from the structural model. Well, the footprint isn't technically the footing, because the footing sits outside of the foundation wall, right? So that wouldn't be good to show that. So we've turned that off in this view. You can't see it. In fact, I think, and now it's not even going to show in there because we completely turned it off. So, but you can see where the footprint potentially would more than likely want to be at. Does anybody want to guess where that might be? Anybody at all? Somebody other than Marcus, because I don't want him to be the head of the class because he'll cheat. Anybody? All right, lively bunch today. It's this line right here. Anybody know why that line right there is the footprint?
Because it's the slab edge.
Very good. You got it. It's the slab edge
And he
because
beat me to it. I was muted.
yes, he did.
Good job, Shane.
Yes. Yep. So there is a foundation wall, small foundation wall here, in this particular construction type. And so that one was pretty easy to find. And when you go to look at this export, that's basically what you're seeing here is you're seeing the outside edge of the slab edge, which is coming from structural. So if I just export out this guy, give it to Justin and his group, they'll know pretty quickly where the footprint is and they can go about their business. Then the next thing that they'd required and asked for, and maybe this building isn't the best one to use, but I'll show you some of the other ones too, is he wanted to know where downspouts, entry doors, windows aren't as important, roof drains, things like that, because those things can be really helpful for them to figure out their calculations and such. So we've created a floor plan view that is cut way above like a roof, and it has its own view template. And if you export out using this, it'll kick out basically a roof export that they can overlay over top of the other one, which is nice that it's two separate DWGs because now they have a little bit more control over what layers they show and which ones they don't in their drawings. They can get this lined up and then they can use this for calculations for their flows or for their catch basin calculations or whatever it is that they do. I don't pretend to be a civil engineer, but it gives them a little bit more control over how to show these types of things and use this information and not have to hunt through, something like this where it's got a bunch of architectural layers in it that, even if you went in here and you turned off the architectural layers, I mean, there's not a ton of them in here, but I mean, there's MEP, there's, all kinds of stuff in here that probably isn't going to be very useful for them. So the point being is you want to make sure that you're not just sending them any view out of a plan with any view template, because we do have a view template that will turn things on and off for them and for you to make it quick. So now it's more of a point and click. Now, what I was saying earlier about the construction type. So this particular construction type, which one was the PEMB? Is it this one, Marcus?
Was that?
Is this building the PEMB one?
Yeah, this is the pre-engineered metal building.
Okay, so yeah, this is the PEMB or pre-engineered metal building. So I kind of misspoke about that being the metal stud and gyp. In this case, it's still the slab edge because pre-engineered metal buildings, usually you would have your grid lines would go to the outside edge of girt. And so that's what these grid lines are kind of showing. So that's a pretty good indicator that that's the footprint. So if you're ever working in a pre-engineered metal building, that's usually a pretty good thing to assume is that these grid lines are your actual footprint. That's an easy one. The other project that we have here is the school. This is CMU and masonry. This one's pretty straightforward as well because masonry usually sits on a concrete foundation wall and has a brick ledge. And so it's pretty easy to know where that footprint is. It's basically this foundation wall. It's structural in nature, but it's the part that hits the grade and goes through the grade. It's the overall footprint of the building. So that one's pretty easy to identify as well. And then, in this export file, let me just run this one for you so you can kind of see how the layering differences. Now, as I'm doing this, I want to touch a little bit on modeling. So, a lot of you have heard a lot from from me specifically and from others that, it's really important that we all model similarly. And this is a perfect example of that. We want to make sure that, let me get this open here. All right, so it's going to be kind of hard to read just because it's dark, but once I select this, so this is another secondary part of what we need to do to help them out. Sure, we could just send this verbatim and they can easily explode this too, because this is a block and obviously you can double click the block and go look in it, but that takes longer. I might just explode this, and it's always good to take a look at what you've exported before you just send it blindly anyway. But you can see here, this is a wall pH exterior. You'll probably also see, it doesn't look like it did it. What we're really looking for is S found. So what that tells me is that the structural folks who did the structural model of this, or whoever modeled it, whether it was us or them, didn't use structural walls for foundation. So there is a method to the madness when it comes to wall creation and column creation, to be honest with you. Notice when I go up here to wall, I have wall architectural and all structural, wall structural. I can actually go in here and pick the same wall type with either. Doesn't really matter, right? I can go in and find exterior stem wall. Cool. I can start modeling that wherever, However, when I look at structural and I go to structural wall, I can also select it, but there's a difference here. Does anybody see the difference? I'm gonna give you a little bit of a hint. It's in this area right here. It's this guy right there. Notice that compared to going to an architectural wall and picking that same type. Notice in that area, it's not structural by nature. That is crucial for this type of exercise, because when I look at this structural model, let's just go in here and select one of these walls. You can tab through, select the wall and kind of take a look at it. This one says it's structural in nature. However, I don't think it was created using the structure tab. I think it was created using the architecture tab. And the reason why I say that is because when I come back here and I look at this CAD file, this layer isn't S structs. That's what I would be looking for, S struct foundation, FNDN, or something like that. This just is an architectural wall partial height exterior. So that's my first clue that somebody didn't model that from the structural tab. I think it's very confusing that you can do it in either place. Unfortunately, that's a thing. But if you're drawing your foundation walls, no matter what they are, your bearing walls, whatever, try to use the structural command, because the layering that it gets exported out as is a DWG, it matters. If any of the exports that we send over to Civil and they look at S found, they're going to know right away that that's the footprint. Because that's the majority of the times that's what's at the ground level for the lowest part of the building. So they can easily move on and say, yep, that's it. We can turn everything else off or delete it and go about our business. So that was one of the kind of sidebars that I wanted to share. It does make a difference on how you model. We're going to start seeing that a little bit more with this Guardian add-in that we've got implemented and are getting installed on everybody's machine to help point people in the right direction for some of these things. It's not meant to do your work for you or, make it a no-brainer and where you can just do whatever you think you got to do and move on and, ignore the comments or the errors, the guidance that pops up or whatever. It's actually meant to help educate and promote awareness of the standard that I think resides in a 2019 manual, but it's also 6 years old. And it predates myself coming here, and we've tried to improve things over the years from what it was when I got here. So just keep that in mind. If you have any questions as you're doing these things, please reach out. I have no problem with questions. The only potential issue is multiple questions of the same thing over and over again with the same person. That one kind of gets a little old, but I'll still help you with a smile on my face, or at least attempt to. Um, I don't know. Does anybody have any questions right now? Awesome. So the third
I have a
option.
question.
Yep, go ahead.
So when we start a project, say it's a brand new project, and we model our building, et cetera. When we go to the views, that view is already going to be in the view template,
Correct.
or does that need to be created?
Nope, this view is already going to be in there. The view template will already be here. The one thing I will say is you may need to tweak your view template depending on how you modeled, depending on how the structural folks modeled. That was kind of where I was going with, how you model makes a difference because and that was just one example, if I modeled using an in-place family for say downspouts and I picked a category called generic model, that's going to export out as a different layer type and name than if you would have used the actual roof category in that model in place category. So it matters, how it's being modeled and how those view settings are set up. The view templates are set up assuming that the categories will be accurate. And so you may have to go in and tweak specific buildings. Like I may have to go in and say, oh, well, and I don't have an example here necessarily, but, I might have to go in here and say, oh, well, shoot, they modeled the, generic models. The downspouts weren't generic models. They used the family that wasn't in a library and it's actually specialty equipment. So now they're not going to show up unless I go in here and make sure that they're going to show up because specialty equipment's not on. So you still have to do your due diligence in looking at your view template. Again, it's not because somebody did something necessarily wrong. It's just that it was modeled in a way that doesn't jive with the view template itself and how it was set up to not necessarily accommodate any and all situations, but the most common ones, if that makes sense. But yes, that these views will be in there. If you get into an older project or a current project and they're not in there and you're asked to do a placeholder, reach out to me. I can get them in there for you pretty quick. I just need a quick second to transfer them in from the template. That includes both view templates and these two views. And then I can even help you try to decide, what you're looking at is accurate or not, or if we have to update the view template. Good question. Anybody else? Cool. So the last thing I'm showing here is another particular a different manufacturing construction type. This one is metal stud and gyp, and I don't think there is a structural model in here. I think these are just walls. One thing I want you to notice how those windows don't look like they're in the wall. In our view template for this, to help alleviate any confusion, there's an option, and I think these options get even more specific in 26 and beyond. But under walls, you can actually turn off non-core layers. Again, this is a big point to make about modeling correctly. I know when I first got here, almost all the wall types, if it was, let's say, a metal stud and gyp on both sides, all of those layers were in the core. Well, in this case, they would all show. So the benefit of this view template wouldn't be as great as it would be as if those walls were set up properly with the finishes outside of the cores and the metal stud being in the core. So just another example of making sure that we're modeling similarly and accurately where possible. But you'll see there's just common edges, non-core, all those are turned off. So that way we only get the core of this wall here. So edit type, if I go look at here, granted, it's only concrete masonry units in this particular one. I don't really know why that is. Oh, it's because this is the foundation, isn't it? For this building. This one is it's the foundation wall down here, concrete stem wall. But in a situation like even the metal stud and gyp, or let's see here, I think this is the one. I don't know these buildings super great, but I think this one has those turned off as well. if I go here, go down to the view template, go into walls, we'll have the same setting. This one, oh, that must have been added after the fact. So that's another good reason why you got to double check it. If you bring in a family or create a new family type after a view template has been created, it'll automatically turn itself on. So just keep that in mind. But the non-core layers, let's go ahead and turn those on real quick and you'll see the difference, hopefully. Or in this case, maybe you won't. Oh, I know why. It's because the view template or the view range is set. No, that one's actually right too. That is a structural. Oh, it's because it's the structural model. Yeah, I picked a bad one for that. Maybe this one would be better because this one shows both the structural, the exterior concrete, and this is the structural model. These have, wow, this is weird. I don't know why that's created like that. Again, this could potentially create an issue. So in this case, you're going to want to get with your structural consultant and just make sure that they're modeling using the structural settings that they should be using and those kinds of things, because it will affect the exports. One of these, I swear, had a bunch of layers in it. And maybe it was this guy. Maybe it'll be easier for me to show it like in a view that doesn't already have it. So here we go. I'm going to just go to the temporary. Another bonus tip, enable temporary views. Use it all the time. It's very handy. Let's go in here and turn off all these, just like mimic everything else. So it looks like, oh, we also have a couple links in here. All right. Insulated metal panel, it's an exterior wall. That's okay. So this is a good example too. And this is totally okay. Nothing wrong with modeling your finishes outside of your wall composition. It's a little bit easier if you keep it maintained as such, or if it's a compound, a stacked wall or something like that. But let's go in here. Oh, this is a stacked wall. That's exactly what it is. So another secret tip, in a stacked wall situation, if you tab through, you can actually get the different layers and then you can check the type composition of it. So notice here that this is correctly set up. The finishes and the thermal layers outside the structural core, and the core is basically the structural part of it, which is the grid. That's great. That's exactly what you want to see. But what we really want to see is this guy. So this is the exterior concrete. It is structural. It's almost impossible to be able to tell if they use the correct structural tab to do that until you export it. So I don't suggest doing that right away, only when you got to export out a footprint. You can go through that process to double check, but view template set up for you automatically. As long as your wall types, you're using the wall types that's in the template, it should be pretty quick and easy. You shouldn't have to really edit much. If you have a structural model, you'll want to make sure that when you export it, you go double check and go check, see if it's got the S foundation layering. If it does not, then you're either going to want to get a hold of the person you're sending the footprint to and explain to them which layer they want to look at, or to make it a little bit more self-explanatory, forgive and forget kind of a thing, push button go kind of a thing. You can reach out to your structural folks and ask them to remodel those and change those to structural, and then send you an update. You can then export that and it'll export as S-found FNDN, because the export settings are based on AIA standards. And so most of them should be pretty good. I think Shane and I have been kind of messing with some CAD DWG export settings for EFIC. They have specific requirements that they need. They want their walls to not be A-wall. They want it to be A-wall-PH for partial height. We're not really sure why. But some jurisdictions do have those kind of limits that they place on you. So I know we kind of went through a lot here. Again, thanks MEP. Hopefully some of you might have learned some of the things here about exporting out DWG files. It might help your workflow. If you haven't done it before, again, reach out to me if if you want some help on how to do that for yourself, if it's a tool that you think you might use. Also know that, it's also going to help you guys when we get surveys, architectural and MEP, when we get surveys from WBK of what line layering types they're going to use. And if you ever get anything from them and you can think of a way to make it easier to use for you, please, please, please let me know. And I will get that to Justin's team. So they're more than willing and to help us out as well. To get us surveys with, certain layers turned on and off if we ask them, and anything else that you might necessarily need to help you move along a little faster. It's like here, I'm going to check the chat here. Yes. The slabbage or slab edge. Yes, correct. You're hearing going. Yeah, right. Let's see. Okay, you guys are all having a good old time here. Awesome. I think that's all I have. If you have any questions, now's the time.
I was going to ask, I don't know if you have time, but could you go through tips for importing a civil file into a Revit model?
I can. That's probably a little bit more loaded than I can get super deep into, but I can do that next time. I can touch on it a little bit though. There are some things that we've seen recently. I don't know how many of you have actually tried to link in a survey file or a file that you asked Justin Crane's team for, and you bring it in and it's all jagged. Or you get an error that says any lines that are far more than 10 square miles from the base point will have graphical issues. That's all because when they do their civil drawings, they're using the GIS coordinate system, which means very rarely will they ever have their line work very, very, very close to their origin, because there's not a ton of those monuments that they use for their benchmarks, and which means a lot of these buildings and a lot of these sites that they're using are way off in the distance according to their benchmark that they used. Does anybody have, by chance, a file that they've received from Civil real quick? I can open it up and show you something, or if not, we can always revisit this in a future one. If you do, throw it in the chat and I'll open it up real quick. But what this requires us to do, both architecturally and MEP, if you ever have to import them for your site, is you really want to make a duplicate copy of what they send you. So that way you have the original that they sent you, and then you can also have one that you can modify. And really what you really need to make sure of, and I might be able to show it here actually. Notice that I'm going to check and see if the UCS is actually at the correct spot here first. There it is. Make sure it's at world. Can't believe I remember all this stuff because you've all heard how I hate this program. This one's not going to be a very good example, but I can talk through it at least. So the origin of your UCS is basically the origin of the model. Actually, let me see if I can go ahead and open that one real quick. That Taylor sent.
I just sent the one from NHBP because that one was like off into the distance and we had done that.
Oh yeah, look at that. Thank you very much. Let's check the UCS, make sure it's at world, and then UCS icon is set to origin. Perfect. This is a perfect example. See how far away these lines are away from this? You got to zoom way out to see how far away from the origin it is. So when Revit brings in a CAD file, it wants to bring it in based on the origin. Now, I haven't tested this. You may be able to manually select center to center placement. It might get a little bit easier for you, but the majority of us go with origin to origin because it makes sense, right? When you're trying to import it. What this would require is us to duplicate this or make sure we're non-destructively editing the one that they sent to us. And first of all, you want to make sure that all the layers are turned on and none of them are frozen, which this one needs to be turned on. You want to make sure everything is turned on and unfrozen. The reason for that is if you don't, there'll be some lingering things out in space that will make you have to go back in here and do it anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all these elements and I'm going to move it. and you can decide where you want to move it from, whether it's a corner of a building or whatever. And I'm just going to try to get it closer. And then I'm going to double click my middle mouse button to zoom extents. And you can see now that the UCS is pretty close to it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep moving this, and I'm going to pick a part of the building that I know is pretty static here. I guess I'll go with this guy. And I'm going to place this directly on this UCS, but you can notice that it doesn't, there's no snaps really. I think sometimes some people have tried Node. I think Point is another one, but I don't even see Point in here. Yeah. So I'll give you a little secret. What I do is I'll just move this out in space and I'll just create a line real quick. And when it says specify first point, if you do 0, 0 and hit enter, it'll automatically, that is if I hit 0, 0 and not, there we go, 0, 0, I hit O, and I'll just draw a line here because then I know that it's starting right at that point. And I'll grab this from the same corner, and I'll just place this. You can see it's kind of hard to see. You can hold shift and right click and do endpoint. It'll force the snap. But now I know that that point is on the origin, and I can save this and then link this version, and you will not have those graphical issues that you may have seen with it when it was way out in space. The one thing I will say is if you've already linked it and you realize that you're having this issue and you go create a new version and you double click it, you open it up, you do the edits, you move it closer to UCS, you save it over top of the original, I still suggest removing it completely from the Revit model and relinking it, because not all it doesn't always automatically fix itself because it's already been linked too far away from the 0, 0 base point, and it's probably going to stay jagged the entire time. So you're better off just to remove it from manage links completely, then relink it, and then you should get cleaner line work. Was there anything else specific, Taylor, that you wanted me to touch on that?
No, I think just moving it to the center and then making sure to link it into the model as opposed to like import it.
Yes. Yes, that's a great general comment. You never want to import CAD files into Revit ever. I say ever, there's an asterisk, but none of you guys are probably creating families and doing some of that other stuff that might allow you to be able to owner and import, because sometimes you don't have a choice. But in terms of the project files, you never want to import a CAD file, because what it does is it brings in a lot of extra junk. It's been an age-old thing. Let's see if this one has had anything inserted, and it's pretty easy to figure out, because if you go to additional settings and you go to line patterns and you look through here and you see anything that says import, oh no, I'm picking on people. I'm not even trying to. This tells me that CAD files have been imported. And it just creates a lot of extra stuff. You'll also notice if you go into manage and then object styles, I think you'll also see it over here on the right. If you look at any of these and you see, like, sometimes it'll say rendering with the RGB code after it. That's another example, way to be able to tell whether or not somebody's imported something. Yeah, those all look good. So that part's not too bad. But yeah, never import CAD. You always want to link it if you can. Anybody else? Awesome. Well, thanks for your attendance. I appreciate it. If you have any other questions that you want to kind of go over individually, please reach out. And when it comes time to export out this placeholder, I'm sure I'll hear from you. Hopefully I'll hear from you so we can make sure we get out a good placeholder DWG file for those guys and we don't have to redo it again. Feel free to reach out. I appreciate the time.
Thanks,
Sweet, thank
Jason.
you.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.